All right. Well, welcome everybody to the Business of Speaking show. I am your host, Tim McDonald, and I am honored to be joined here today by my special guest, Jeff Harry. How you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure to have you here, and I can't wait to dive into our conversation. But before I do, I'd just like to let everybody know, the Business of Speaking show is really not focusing on what the speakers talk about on stage as much as their journey to get to the stage, what they've learned since they've been on the stage, and be able to share that with people who are interested in just starting their speaking career. Maybe you've already started, but you're just getting going. Or if 2020 hasn't taught us anything, no matter what we think we know, we are never prepared for everything that life has to throw at us.
Yes, never prepared.
So with that, Jeff, before we dive into how you started, why don't you tell us a little bit about, your business today, what it looks like, and
Sure.
some of your major accomplishments?
Yeah. So I run an organization called Rediscover Your Play, and we help organizations tackle their most challenging issues through play. We actually put people in experiences where they're in the shoes of their colleagues, and then they hash out their hardest, most difficult challenges. So one of the workshops I run with my colleague Gary Ware is how do you deal with a-holes at work through play, also known as how do you deal with toxic people at work through play. And just in that workshop alone, it brought us to Inbound, this huge marketing conference. It brought us to South by Southwest. And then right before COVID hit, it brought us to Australia where we spoke at PauseFest. And that won us an award for being one of the top 100 HR influencers of 2020. So that has been really cool, right? And then I'm going to be speaking or presenting at the world's largest HR virtual summit coming up in October, HR Virtual Summit by Bamboo HR. And we're running a workshop on how to not be racist at work by accident. And we're, my whole goal is to create these workshops that are a little provocative, but also try to dive into issues that usually are not tackled. Other workshops that I also run are how do you play with your inner critic, dealing with office politics, but all of them are wrapped around the umbrella of play. And what I consider it a pretty good accomplishment, I most recently my work was featured in the New York Times in an article called "How Do You Add More Play to Your Grown-Up Life Even Now?"
Well, fantastic. There's so much there. I'd love to hear the story. How did this all start for you?
Well, I mean, how did the speaking start for me?
Yeah. I mean, really, I think that's where we focus on with this show is
Yeah,
the speaking side of things. But
exactly.
I
Yeah.
know sometimes that happens before we start a company, sometimes after. But
Right. So it's interesting because I as I was preparing for this, I was trying to think of when did I first start speaking? Because like every kid, you're like freaked out the first time you speak, right? I remember one of my first talks, I talked about poaching in seventh grade. I didn't even know what it was. I had to study it. It was so horrible. People were bored. They were they were like throwing stuff at me, and I was like, I will never be a public speaker. That's just never going to happen. And then fast forward to about 2006, 2007, I loved stand-up comedy, and I had been going to a lot of open mics, just watching them. And then one day, I remember reading Malcolm Gladwell's book about 10,000 hours, and then speaking to a really, top comedian at the time or an up-and-comer. And I asked him, how many performances before you felt like you were really good? And he was just like, based off the 10,000 hours, he's like 1,000 performances. And I was just like, wait, I want to be a stand-up comedian. I want to see if I could do this. So in 2007, for 6 months, I did 150 stand-up routines at open mics, at small paid gigs, whatever I could get. Sometimes driving all over the Bay Area. I was living in the Oakland, San Francisco area at the time. And it just was torturous, dude. It was so painful. But because of that, I realized it wasn't that bad. I wasn't going to die up there. And I think a lot of people feel they're going to die when they're up on stage and people are not vibing with them. And then from there, I took that to campaign work and realized, oh, I didn't want to actually just tell stupid jokes. I actually wanted to make an impact on people's lives. And I used speaking in my campaign work. And then I eventually started using speaking at my job when I would facilitate a lot of team building events. And then I was like, oh, this is awesome. I want to use speaking as a way to spread a certain message. And that message is all about play and how can you use play to change your life.
Well, you said you use speaking in your campaign work. What was that exactly?
So in 2007, I was doing stand-up comedy, right? In 2008, I joined the Obama campaign, and there was something, we would do these things called Camp Obamas, where we would train people on Marshall Gans, who's this community organizer's he's like a thought leader in the community organizer world. And we would train people on how to tell their story, which is ironic because it's about speaking, right? How do you tell your story when you knock on someone's door? It's not about like trying to persuade them you're right and they're wrong politically. It's about connecting your story to their story, right? So it was a story. It started with, the story of you, right? And what's that? And really diving into the vulnerability of what that is. And then attaching that to the story of us, which is like, how are we connected? And then attaching it to the story of now of like, why is this moment in time so important that now that we're both connected, how are we going to take action? And just utilizing that and training people and having to speak in front of 100, 200 people on a regular basis, using this training, I started to realize the impact I was seeing when people would be crying or people would be hugging each other at the end of the workshop. And you knew you ran a good workshop, and you can say this with speakers too, you've run a really good workshop, not even a talk, but a good workshop when you are thanking the audience and the audience is thanking you. Like it's because it's an exchange and not so much just like it's about you.
I love that. So it sounds like, well, first of all, let me go back to the stand-up because I know you said how horrible you felt like you did the first time, right? Mm-hmm. What got you back up there again?
Well, usually, for anyone thinking about doing stand-up comedy, your first time is actually great because people will announce you. This is your very first time doing stand-up, so everyone is super nice to you. And then you're like, and then you don't have a good set because you don't know what you're doing, but you do something and everyone laughs because they feel, you're like someone on training wheels, right? But after that, it's like, it's for every one great performance, you have 10 horrible ones. But what gets you to keep going up is the laughs. Like you get addicted to the laughs, which is kind of dangerous because it's almost like getting addicted to the likes or the follows, right? But you get addicted to that and you're just like, I just want to feel that once again. And that's why you keep coming back because you're just hoping that 1 in 10 times might turn into 1 in 5 and eventually turn into consistent.
And and I'm just trying to connect the dots for myself and anybody listening too, is it really feels like that stand-up got you the confidence to get up in front of people.
Yeah. It got me the reps. I'm all about getting reps. And once you get reps in any of the talks that I either do or help people, because I sometimes help people, or train them to get to speak. And I'm like, it's all about how many reps can we get in and how many real live reps can we get in also. Like, let's do them in front of your friends. Let's do them in front of strangers. Let's do it a lot of times so that by the time you get up there, you've made so many of the mistakes and now you're ready to actually like have fun and play in this setting.
So, and I know you mentioned at the very beginning that your whole big umbrella is play. Mm-hmm. So are we to understand that play doesn't always start as this fun thing?
I mean, the thing that's ironic, right, is the way I define play is anything you do that makes any joyful act that you do that makes you fully present where you forget about time, right? And you know this because you've done stuff, you've gotten into the zone or you're in flow and you just forget about time, right? You don't have anxiety about the future. You don't have regrets about the past. You're just fully present in the moment and you're falling in love with the process. And that can happen as a speaker. There's times when I'm speaking and you feel like you're channeling something. You're channeling a message. I'm sure you felt this too. You're channeling a message and it's not really your message. It's just this message has visited you. Elizabeth Gilbert talks a lot about this where she says, genius visits you. No one's a genius, but genius visits you and you have a choice whether you want to let it, you birth it, or that idea is going to go to somebody else. So if you hear someone else doing your talk later on, you're like, oh, someone's doing my talk. It's like, well, you didn't do it. You didn't put it out there, right? So you really have to like allow yourself to connect. So yeah, that's what I was just trying to do is through play. When you, my play mentor, Gwen Gordon says this a lot. You can't play if you're not able to first soothe yourself, to like calm yourself down. Like if you're in anxiety or you're angry or frustrated, you're just not going to be able to play. And what's interesting about soothing is you gain that from the person that took care of you before. You actually adopt their nervous system, right, in some ways. So you have to realize like, okay, how do I calm myself down so I can play on this stage when I'm speaking? And that's why I recommend so many repetitions, because then when you fail all those times and you realize, oh, I'm not going to die up on stage, then you can kind of start to play with it when you're on stage and start having fun with it. And you don't really care if you make a mistake up there because you're not trying to be perfect and you know that you can recover from it.
And so when you went from doing the stand-up to doing the campaign work and really feeling that emotion that you were able to make the connection with, what kind of led you into that next step?
The next step after the campaign work?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I took that work to doing, I was running a program where we taught kids engineering with Lego. So a lot of, and we grew it really huge. I grew it from like 7 people to like 400 people. It was like one of the largest STEM organizations in the country. And while we were doing that, we were in the Bay Area. So we knew a lot of tech companies. And we were getting more and more attention from them. So like the Facebooks, the Adobes, the Googles would start asking us, hey, do you do team building events? And we were like, yeah, sure. Even though we didn't, we were just like, oh, let's just make it up as we go along, right? So we started running team building events. And through that, I started speaking in front of a lot more Fortune 500 companies. So they would ask me sometimes to do keynotes. They would ask me sometimes to run workshops. But in each and every setting, I realized like, oh, this is another opportunity where I can advocate for play and how you can solve really tough issues using play. And that's when I started getting reps in the Fortune 500 world. And what was also great about that was, unlike stand-up comedy where the goal was to get people to laugh, all you needed to do was do something compelling, but you didn't have to get people to laugh. And it's so much harder to get people to laugh that everything else seemed easy after that.
So I know when you were talking right at the very beginning, you were saying that you like to take your topics and make them provocative.
Yeah.
Has that been since the very beginning, or is it something you gained the confidence in and kind of grew into, or what made you realize that that was a way that you needed to be for your business?
I guess I fell into it because I realized that so a lot of companies at first would want us to talk about creativity and collaboration and connection and, all these buzzwords, right? But when I finish these talks or I finish these workshops or whatever event I was running, I didn't feel like I really connected deeply. I felt like I connected on a superficial level, but I didn't go deep. And I was like, these are just not compelling enough. They're not compelling enough for me. So they probably are not compelling enough for them. So I started asking, what is it that you actually want to talk about? What are the things that are being avoided, but are what people really should need to be addressed in order to make a more inclusive, enjoyable, fun, fulfilling workplace. Because like at the end of the day, if you're going to be working 40 to 60 hours a week, you know, over 2,500 hours a year, you should enjoy your work, right? So, so I was like, okay, let me figure out how I can help tackle that issue.
I love it. And so none of these were like a plan that you had at the very beginning. It just all like the reps that you kind of put in
Mm-hmm.
and then the opportunities that came about as a result of that, whether it be the companies that you started talking with or the way that you started having the confidence to get a little bit more edgy and deep
Right.
on the
And there's
topics.
and also I embraced the play oriented aspect of it. I played, right? I was just like, well, let me try this topic or let me try this. And sometimes it resonated and sometimes it doesn't. But if you're open to letting go of the result, right? The result of like, I want to be Brene Brown or I want to be Tony Robbins, because expectations are the thief of joy. And if you're constantly comparing yourself to the top speakers all the time, then you're always going to be disappointed. But if you're more like, well, let me think of like what value I can bring. What message I would ask this to your listeners, what message, if you could have one message that you could share and you only had maybe 10 minutes to share it, what would be your message to the world, right? The whole TED talk ask. Or even if you just had only 2 minutes, what would be your message to the world? And then it's all about first attaching to that. Like, I have something tangible that I really want to say that I think could impact the world. And then starting from that curious place and seeing where that takes you and following your curiosity from there, like, ooh, well, I wanted to talk about play, but ooh, let me talk about play in the context of work. Ooh, let me talk about play in the context of toxicity, in the context of inclusivity. Like, you start to just meander and then you just see where the adventure leads you. And it's so much better of a ride than you being like, I must get this amount of talks every year. And if I don't, then I'm a failure.
I love it. And I know we're getting a little bit close on time, but I'd really like to, just before we kind of start wrapping up, is understand, you know, how does the speaking, because I know you were mentioning some of the, inbound and some of the conferences that you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be speaking at. Um, Obviously, you still have your company and you do a lot of these workshops and everything. How is the speaking outside of the workshops and the trainings that you do getting up on a keynote stage, so to speak? How does that kind of play into your business today, and how do you see it growing in the future?
Um, I think it's a combination of things, right? Because I'll speak at a lot of conferences, and those conferences will either lead to workshops or lead to keynotes, right? So a lot of times when you're doing conferences, you're doing them for free, right? As an opportunity for exposure. So those are, but then sometimes when you're doing podcasts or other things like that, companies will come to you and be like, "Ooh, like I'm about to do a talk for a biotech company for their employee appreciation day." And it's all about how do you get into flow, right? And they found me partly because of podcasts and also because of my New York Times article. So like there's those that I can get. And then there's places where I applied to Campus Speaks, which is an organization that is almost like a bureau just for the college scene, and they're going to set me up with a bunch of keynotes for various college organizations, whether that's clubs or fraternities or whatever would fit my message, right? Yeah, and then I'm looking right now at applying to a few speaker bureaus, and then I just applied to the TED Fellows program. So there's a lot of like different ways in which you can do it, right? But I think what I do a lot is I speak at a lot of conferences. Through those conferences, we connect with a lot of organizations, and in those organizations, then I either do keynotes for those organizations or I do workshops or both.
Perfect. Well, before we kind of wrap up, one question I love asking is, knowing what you know today about your speaking business, what's one piece of advice you would give yourself when you were first getting started if you could go back and change anything?
Mm. I would remind myself from the very beginning, which is ironic, but has really helped me. Um, when I'm speaking is like, it's not about you. Like, it's just not about you, Jeff. Like, even though you're up on stage and even though you're the one delivering the message, it's about the message. It's not about you. So the more you can actually think when you're on stage that you're not doing it for yourself, but you're doing it for the audience, you're doing it for the listeners, you're providing them value. Like a mantra I tell people, or I tell myself as I'm getting prepared to speak, is like, what I'm going to say is going to have an impact on somebody's life. And I keep repeating that to myself as I'm going up there. And even while I'm up there and I'm like, oh, I see, because sometimes because of your negativity bias based off my positive psychology stuff, so you sometimes see the one person that is frowning in the audience. You're like, that person doesn't like it. So I guess everyone does it, right? But that's your negativity bias. But so I'll repeat back to myself this what I'm saying will have an impact on someone's life, and have them show up in a way that they're only going to show up if I fully show up. Right. So once I'm able to embrace that and realize that it's bigger than you. The message is more important than you. It's so much easier to go up there, because then you're not like criticizing yourself. You're not beating yourself up. You're not trying to be perfect. You're just delivering a message that the world needs to hear.
I love it. I love it. So how can people learn more about you and your work, and how can they connect with you online?
Sure. So you can find me at rediscoveryourplay.com. And then I make a lot of really stupid, ridiculous videos at the handle Jeff Harry Plays. So JeffHarryPlays. And I'm on TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, all at that handle.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jeff. And thank you for watching today. And if it is your first time watching us on the Business of Speaking show, we are going to sign off of YouTube right now. But Jeff has agreed to stay on with me for one additional question that will only be available to our email subscribers. So as a special treat, head over to speaking.business, sign up for our email list, and you will get our weekly email with this exclusive content, including Jeff's answer, that will be available nowhere else. So we look forward to seeing you there. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for watching.
Thanks so much for having me.